It was supposed to be a quiet night, the kind Gloria Tate had lived through 1,000 times before, bone-tired, footsore, and wrapped in the heavy silence of late-shift exhaustion. Savannah's heat had begun to loosen its grip, but the air still hung thick with humidity, making her cotton scrubs cling to her skin as she stepped out of her car. The pharmacy's flickering sign buzzed faintly in the suburban strip mall lot, casting a pale, yellowed glow onto the cracked asphalt. She moved slowly, carefully, like a woman whose body remembered every shift, every stair climbed, every life held together by a thread, and her steady hands. Her sedan clicked as it cooled behind her, engine ticking like a clock winding down. She adjusted her purse on her shoulder, her breath steady, shallow, her thoughts already drifting toward the comfort of her living room recliner and the quiet hum of the fan she kept running even through fall. Inside, the pharmacy was nearly empty, just the dull hum of fluorescent lights and the distant beep of an automatic blood pressure machine no one was using. A teen clerk stood behind the counter, half-slouched, thumbs dancing on his phone. He didn't look up right away, didn't need to. She wasn't the kind of customer who made demands. Gloria approached the counter and offered a soft, practiced smile, the kind she gave to patients who woke disoriented and afraid. Just here to pick up a refill. Blood pressure meds. She handed over her ID and insurance card. The paper prescriptions slid across the counter like any other night. Routine. Familiar. The clerk blinked, scanned the card, tapped a few keys, then paused. Frowned. Tapped again. He squinted at the screen, his posture stiffening just a little. Then he leaned sideways and whispered to someone out of view. A manager, white, mid-40s, jaw locked in a tight line that suggested she woke up suspicious. They didn't look at her, not directly. Just that flicking glance, sharp and fast like a blade testing skin. Gloria straightened her shoulders. She knew this feeling, that shift in the air. The barely there silence before a storm. The kind of tension you can't see but can feel, rising, slow, like water against the ankles of someone not paying attention. The manager stepped forward. Her smile was rehearsed, tight. "I tears, sorry, Mastim. There's an issue with your prescription." Gloria tilted her head, polite but puzzled. "What kind of issue?" "Your details? They don't stat match." I'm afraid we can stat process this right now." Gloria reached into her bag, pulled out a second form of ID, unfolded her printed insurance confirmation. "Everything steps here. I ships filled the same prescription here for years." The woman didn't lean closer. "Didn't look, you need to wait here," she said, stepping back. "We, contacted the authorities." It hit like a dropped pane of glass. Sharp, absurd, shattering. "The authorities?" Gloria asked. Her voice calm but tight. Her heart had begun its steady climb in her chest. Behind the counter, the boy looked anywhere but at her. And outside, faint but unmistakable, sirens began to rise. She could have left. She could have demanded her documents back. But that's how they framed you. That's how they said she ran. And Gloria Tate hadn't run from anything in 58 years. So she stood. Not with anger. Not yet. Just stillness. Waiting. Watching. And in the still air of that glowing pharmacy, under flickering lights and too many assumptions, the world began to shift. Not loudly. Not yet. But enough to change everything. Because tonight wasn't just another night. Tonight would be the night. The one where everything started. The cuffs were too tight. Gloria Tate sat on the metal bench in the back of the patrol car, wrists pinched raw beneath cold steel. The vinyl seat stuck to the backs of her legs, and each curve in the road jolted her spine as if the car itself wanted to grind her down. She said nothing. Just stared through the window, watched the blurry smear of streetlights pass like ghosts floating over Savannah's cracked sidewalks. They hadn't spoken to her since closing the door. Not really. Officer Coleman had muttered something smug as he shoved her inside, something about not making it harder than it had to be. But she'd heard that voice before, too many times, in too many rooms, and not always in uniform. What she carried in that silence, what they couldn't see, wasn't just a nurse's badge or a night's exhaustion. It was 30 years of broken bodies and breathless prayers. It was waking up every morning to care for people who sometimes barely looked her in the eye, and doing it anyway, because that was the job, because that was who she was. It was being 17, the first time someone called her aggressive for raising her voice in a school hallway. It was her mother gripping the wheel tighter during a traffic stop, whispering, "Don't move, baby, don't even blink." It was her son Marcus, pulled over 6 times before his 20th birthday, and learning how to narrate every motion for the benefit of a dashboard camera. Gloria had never been arrested before, never even been close. Her world was order. Clipboards, blood pressure cuffs, charts scribbled in shorthand she could read in her sleep. Her hands were steady in a crisis had to be, but now they trembled, ever so slightly, where the cuffs pressed into her lap. She didn't cry. Wouldn't. That, too, was something she'd been taught. Her tears would not move them. Her pain would not soften them. She knew what they saw when they looked at her, a middle-aged black woman with tired eyes and too much certainty in her voice. A threat, somehow. A problem to be processed. Coleman chuckled up front. Something crude about these types thinking they were too good to follow the rules. Gloria didn't flinch. She knew the script. She had seen it unfold over and over in hospital, waiting rooms, in neighborhood hearings, in hushed conversations after funerals no one wanted to talk about. And yet, here she was. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that she had already survived harder nights than this. Nights sitting beside mothers who held the hands of dying sons. Nights spent arguing with insurance companies to cover medications that could save someone's life. Nights with no heat, no sleep, but always a sense of purpose. This wasn't set, the worst thing she stepped endured. But it was the most visible. The shame wasn't hers. She wouldn't let it be. Even as they pulled into the precinct, even as the headlights painted the peeling white walls in pale, shaking shadows, Gloria sat tall. She knew who she was. Her father had once told her, "The world will try to tell you who you are every damn day. Your job is to remember first." She hadn't always succeeded. But tonight, in the back seat of a squad car she should never have seen the inside of, she held on to that voice like a lifeline. Let them take the mugshot. Let them whisper their assumptions. Let them write reports already soaked in bias. She would not be broken by this, because she knew the weight she carried, and she knew how to carry it with grace. Even when the world refused to see it. The chime over the pharmacy door rang like a gunshot. 2 officers stepped inside, the cool blast of night air following them in. The first was tall, square-shouldered, with a shaved head and the permanent scowl of someone who'd forgotten long ago how to separate power from pride. The second was younger, thinner, hovering half a step behind, with that twitchy uncertainty of someone who hadn't yet decided who he wanted to be when no one was watching. The boy behind the counter flinched. The manager stood straighter, already motioning them over with brisk, over-practiced confidence. "That sips her," she said. No preamble, no context, just a pointed finger, and the poisoned certainty of someone who believed accusation was the same as guilt. Tried to pick up medication with someone else sips insurance. The accounts don't set match. She wouldn't set leave. Gloria didn't move. She stood near the counter, where she'd been waiting quietly. Every document still neatly in her hand. Her ID, her insurance card, her prescription, all the things that were supposed to prove her humanity. But they didn't look at them. They didn't even ask. The tall one, Coleman, she would later learn, approached like a man already sure of the ending. He smelled faintly of aftershave and control. "Ma sepum," he said. drawing the word out, voice heavy with performance. "I'm going to need you to step outside." Gloria looked up slowly, evenly. "I haven't done anything wrong." The words didn't tremble. They weren't a protest. They were a statement of fact, but it didn't matter. Coleman Stepp's hand dropped to his belt. Behind him, the younger officer, Miller, shifted from foot to foot. Eyes darting, face caught somewhere between embarrassment and obedience. He wouldn't meet her gaze. The manager crossed her arms, chin lifted, lips twitching with something close to victory. The line had been crossed, and everyone knew it. Gloria inhaled through her nose, slow and deep, like she had on long nights in the ER, when everything was falling apart, and she had to be the calm in someone else. Sip's storm. She held up the documents, steady as steel. "Everything you need is right here." Coleman barely glanced at them. "Step outside," he repeated. Tone darker now, a warning stitched with threat. When she didn't move fast enough, when she stood a little too tall, a little too still, he reached for her wrist. His grip was sharp, too tight. And suddenly the room changed. Gasps cracked through the pharmacy, like snapped branches. A mother ushered her child toward the exit. A man by the cold medicine aisle pulled out his phone, began to record. Gloria's breath caught, not from pain, but from the sickening familiarity of it. The same way a body remembers a scar. This was how they did it. Not with fists at first, but with decisions, with a refusal to look, a refusal to ask, the assumption of guilt draped like a noose around her shoulders. She didn't resist. To resist would be to give them what they wanted. Instead, she let her hands be pulled behind her. Felt the metal bite down, heard the cuff click into place like a final sentence. She stood there, wrists bound, head high, heart hammering so loud she thought it might burst through her ribs. And still, she didn't look away. Not from the officer. Not from the manager. Not from the silent witnesses who watched her be taken without a word. Even as the sting of humiliation rose in her throat, she held her silence like armor. As they walked her past the pharmacy aisles, her heels echoing against linoleum, Gloria scanned the shelves of toothpaste and vitamins and cough syrup. The ordinary things of ordinary life, and understood they had decided she didn't belong in that world anymore. The automatic doors slid open with a hiss, and the humid Georgian night rushed in. Behind her, someone whispered. She didn't even raise her voice. In front of her, a police cruiser waited. Engine idling, back door already open. They placed her inside. The door slammed shut with finality. And Gloria Tate, nurse, mother, daughter, citizen, sat behind the reinforced glass, wrists aching, dignity intact, and thought, "This is what it feels like when they stop pretending. This is what it looks like when the mask comes off, and the world, at last, is watching." The cell door clanged shut behind her, echoing like a bell struck too hard. Gloria Tate didn't flinch. The sound rolled down the corridor, then vanished into silence. The kind that settles over a place too used to holding shame. She sat on the metal bench without a sound, lowering herself slowly, deliberately, as if even the act of sitting were an act of control. The cinder block walls were a pale, sickly gray, their corners chipped and darkened from years of disuse and disregard. The overhead light buzzed above her, cold and flickering, casting her shadow long across the floor. But Gloria did not move. She rested her hands, still ringed in the red ghost of the cuffs, gently in her lap. Her back stayed straight. Her chin remained level. She would give them nothing of the storm churning inside her. This was not the first time she had been humiliated, but it was the first time they had tried to silence her with steel. And even here, in the belly of a place built to break people, she refused to be small. She heard footsteps pass her cell, once, twice. Keys jangled. A door opened somewhere. A phone rang. Then the quiet returned, deeper now, heavier. A kind of silence that tried to press in around her like fog, one that said, "You are alone." But Gloria knew better. The stillness was a lie they told to cover what they feared most, a woman who would not bow, would not shrink, would not scream. So she sat. Not in defiance, not in fear, but in presence. Let them record it. Let them write their reports and file their versions of tonight. She would sit through every minute, every breath, every insult swallowed in the dark. Because they had already underestimated her. And that was their first mistake. The second? Thinking this silence meant surrender. It didn't stet. It meant preparation. Gloria breathed in deeply. The air smelled of bleach and dust, of years of spit-shined concrete and closed mouths. She'd worked long enough in emergency rooms to know the scent of barely contained panic. She'd seen that look before, the kind of brittle pride that cracks when held up to real consequence. And something in her knew they were already cracking. Maybe not out loud. Maybe not yet. But soon, she closed her eyes. Just for a moment. Not to sleep, not to escape. To center. To hold herself steady in a world that had just tried to knock her off balance. She was not rage. She was not fear. She was stillness. And stillness, Gloria Tate knew, could be louder than any scream. It began with a vibration. The faint buzz of a phone on a kitchen counter, just past midnight. One ring, then another. A quiet pulse that cut through the stillness of Walter Tate's house like a tremor before an earthquake. He was already awake. He didn't sleep much anymore. Not since retirement, not since the nights had grown heavier with the weight of all the cases he hadn't solved, all the names buried in sealed folders. The TV was off. The house, silent. Just the soft creak of aging wood and the whisper of Georgia wind moving through the screens. When he picked up the phone, he didn't say hello. "Who is it?" His voice was low, lined with gravel, and without a trace of warmth. On the other end, a young voice hesitated. "Marcus, Gloria Sepp's son." Breath shallow. Trembling beneath forced calm. "It's Sepp's mom. They arrested her." The pause that followed was short, but thick, like something breaking just beneath the surface. Walter closed his eyes. "Where?" he asked. Already standing? Already reaching for the jacket slung over the back of a chair. Savannah, PD. The precinct on Garden Street. Some mess at a pharmacy. They said she was trying to pick up meds with the wrong insurance, but Marcus Sepp's voice cracked, rage pushing through his panic. She wasn't Sepp's her own medication. She had everything, and they still put her in cuffs. Walter didn't speak right away. He was lacing his boots. The familiar rhythm calmed him. Left, right, tight, double knot. "How long ago?" he asked. "Maybe an hour." They Sepp got her in holding. She didn't resist. "Dad." She just stood there. Walter Sepp's hand tightened around the phone. That was her way. Calm in the face of chaos. Stillness that said more than shouting ever could. "She needs you," Marcus whispered. "I'm already gone," Walter said, and ended the call. Outside, the sky was ink-black and moonless. His car's headlights sliced through the night like a blade. The engine rumbled to life beneath his hands, steady and sure, and he pulled out of the driveway with a focus that hadn't dulled since the bureau. Gloria wasn't just his daughter. She was his mirror, his legacy. The one he'd taught to walk with purpose, to speak with clarity, to never apologize for the weight of her voice. And tonight someone had tried to take that from her. Someone had dared to put their hands on the wrong woman. He didn't know exactly what he'd find when he arrived. But he knew one thing with the certainty of a man who had stared down corruption more times than he could count. They were going to learn fast that the story wasn't going to unfold the way they thought. Because Gloria Tate was not alone. And the call had been made. The air inside the precinct had changed. Not loud. Not chaotic. Something quieter, heavier, like the silence before a roof caves in. Somewhere in the back, a phone rang. Then another. And no one answered. Officer Coleman stood behind the booking desk, arms folded, posture wide, like a man trying to hold onto ground already shifting beneath his feet. His smirk had faded to something thinner, taut around the jaw. Miller leaned against the wall, one shoe tapping the floor in a restless, staccato beat. His mouth twitched with every phone buzz, every low conversation happening just out of earshot. Walter Tate had arrived 20 minutes ago. He hadn't raised his voice. Hadn't even stepped past the front counter, but he didn't need to. His name alone, spoken low by one trembling officer to another, had been enough to send the front desk sergeant scrambling for backup. Now federal agents were walking the halls, dark suits, earpieces, case files tucked beneath their arms like instruments of war. One peeled off toward the squad room, another toward the evidence lockup, another toward internal systems. And the eyes turned. One by one. Not toward Gloria, still sitting in the holding cell with her hands folded neatly in her lap, but toward the men who had placed her there. The walls that had once felt so solid, so smug in their indifference, had begun to crack. The arrogance, the ritual, the routine, none of it was holding. Not against this. Not against him. Walter stood with his hands behind his back, flanked by two agents. He wasn't posturing. He was waiting. And every officer in that room felt it. Then it began. A clerk from records appeared pale-faced at the desk with a manila envelope. "You're going to want to see this," he muttered, sliding it toward one of the agents. Body cam footage. Not edited. Not cherry-picked. Full, raw, uncut. Inside the squad room, someone pulled it up on a shared screen. The click of the mouse was loud in the quiet. There she was. Gloria Tate, standing in the pharmacy. Calm, composed. Her voice clear, her ID extended, her tone unwavering. Then Coleman, mouth twisted, voice rising. The grab, the cuffs, the silence in her eyes. The footage played in damning stillness. No aggression, no resistance. Only the slow collapse of protocol, dignity, and due process documented in high definition. Miller turned away from the screen. His hand scrubbed at his face like he could wipe the truth from it. Another phone rang. This time someone picked up. They didn't speak, just listened. And then their face went white. The Department of Justice had been alerted, not just to this incident, but to patterns. Names. Complaints that had been buried, folded into drawers, lost in the churn of bureaucracy. Not anymore. An agent approached the desk with a portable drive. "We still need access to all body cam archives for the last 18 months, she said. "Tonight is just the beginning." Coleman took a step forward, voice cracking like dry wood. "You don't net at the right." Walter Sipp's voice cut through the room like a scalpel. "They do. And so do I." He turned, slow and deliberate, toward the holding cell. "Unlock it." No one moved. Now, keys jingled. The lock clicked, and the door opened with the soft, metallic groan of something irreversible. Gloria didn't rise right away. She stood slowly, with purpose. No anger, no flinch, just presence. When she stepped out, the entire room felt it. The shift, the gravity. No one dared meet her eyes. She walked past them. Coleman, Miller, the sergeant, the clerk, like a ghost walking through the wreckage of what they thought was untouchable. Walter didn't touch her, didn't rush her. He simply walked a step behind, the way a man follows a storm he knew would come. Outside, the night was still humid. But something in the air had broken. Inside, the phones kept ringing. And now, someone was always picking up. Because the unraveling had begun. And there was no stitching it back together. The room fell still when Walter Tate walked in. Not quiet, still. That unnatural kind of stillness that settles in when everyone realizes too late that the story they've been writing has just changed authors. He didn't need to shout. His badge didn't need to flash. The federal agents behind him didn't need to say a word. They were the punctuation to his presence, and his presence was a full stop. The precinct floor, once buzzing with casual conversation and the illusion of routine, turned hushed and brittle. Officers froze mid-sentence. Miller stood like a deer too proud to admit he was already in the headlights. Coleman, arms still crossed, tried to keep his chin lifted, but the color in his face had gone from red to gray. Walter's gaze swept across the station like floodlights in a dark alley, nothing dramatic, just deliberate. Measuring. Calculating. "Where's Seps, the desk sergeant?" he asked. A man stepped forward, throat bobbing. "That would be me." "Good. Then explain to me why a licensed nurse with no criminal record and full documentation was placed in a holding cell for a routine prescription pickup." The sergeant stammered. "There was a discrepancy in the system. The manager flagged it, and—" Walter Stepp's voice didn't rise. "It didn't Stepp need to. You didn't stat check. You didn't stat ask. You didn't stat verify." He stepped closer. "You cuffed her. You paraded her out in front of witnesses, and now your body cams tell the story you once stat." He nodded toward an agent, who held up a tablet. Footage rolled on mute, Gloria calm, compliant, dignified. Coleman hostile, Miller withdrawn. The cuffs, the looks, the silence. The agent paused the footage mid-frame. Gloria, wrists behind her back, head held high, walking out of the pharmacy under flickering lights. The screenshot hung in the air like a mirror. Coleman stepped forward. She was non-compliant. She didn't stat leave when asked. She stood, Walter said, turning toward him. "That Sips what bothers you, isn't septed, that she didn't set cower, that she didn't set break." Another agent moved past them, collecting reports, scanning login records. In the background, federal monitors flickered to life, pulling files from internal systems. Complaints, body cam footage, reports filed late or not at all. One after another, the pieces started to surface. 15 prior complaints. 3 internal investigations that never reached completion. Dozens of red flags buried under administrative dust. "You start not just looking at misconduct," said the lead DOJ agent, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper voice. "You start looking at a pattern." Coleman bristled. "This is overreach." "No," Walter said, "this is consequence." He turned to Gloria, who stood just inside the room. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence was more potent than any speech he could have written. Walter looked back at the officers, the same ones who had dismissed her, diminished her, humiliated her. He saw it now, the unraveling had become collapse. And the weight of accountability, long deferred, had finally found a place to land. "You thought she was alone," he said, "but you were wrong." He gestured toward the hallway, where 2 more agents entered, each carrying sealed federal orders. The DOJ agent stepped forward, reading them aloud. "Effective immediately. Officers Rick Coleman and David Miller are suspended from duty pending criminal investigation into civil rights violations, unlawful arrest, and falsification of records." The silence cracked. A murmur swept the room like wind through dry leaves. Miller sat down hard on a bench. Coleman clenched his fists but didn't move. Walter didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He only nodded once quietly, like a man sealing a door behind him. "This is just the beginning," he said. And when he turned to walk away, Gloria fell in beside him. Her chin still high, the quiet strength in her steps louder than anything they left behind. The sun was rising by the time Gloria stepped out of the precinct. Not fully, not in that golden, triumphant way. Just the first suggestion of light edging over the horizon, soft, bruised pink bleeding into the navy of night. The air smelled different now, still humid, still Georgia, but touched with something new, something like change. She paused on the top step, just outside the glass doors, blinking into the soft murk of morning. Behind her, the station buzzed with the low thrum of movement, federal agents still unpacking records, collecting statements, speaking in clipped tones that carried the weight of consequence. But out here? Stillness. Only this time, it wasn't silence born of fear. It was the breath after. The crowd outside had mostly dispersed. A few reporters lingered, their voices hushed, their lenses lowered. Some protest signs leaned forgotten against a bench. A woman in a hoodie offered her a small nod. No words, just that look, the kind passed between those who know. Walter stood beside her, silent, watchful. His presence, a steady warmth, at her back. He didn't touch her, didn't need to. After everything, words between them were almost beside the point. "I didn't think it would feel like this," Gloria murmured. "Like what?" "Quiet. Not victorious, just clear." Walter nodded, eyes scanning the early light. Justice isn't a victory march. It steps cleanup after a flood. It steps the part where you mop the floor and ask who steps missing. She exhaled slowly, feeling the fatigue crawl deeper into her bones now that adrenaline had gone. But it wasn't the same weight as before. This one didn't press down, it simply reminded her she'd endured. Inside the station, Coleman and Miller were being processed. Not like criminals yet, but not like officers anymore either. Their names were no longer shielded behind protocol. Their badges were on a desk, not a chest. And their stories would no longer be told without footnotes of failure. A car door opened at the curb. Marcus, her son. He stood with the door held open, his eyes searching hers, not with fear this time, but awe, like he was still trying to wrap his mind around what his mother had done. Gloria stepped forward. The moment was hers to close, but not to finish. This wasn't the end of something. It was the unveiling. The moment where the system, so used to moving in darkness, was caught in the act, where the cameras stayed rolling, where dignity didn't fold under pressure. She turned back toward the building once more. Not to gloat, not to linger, just to see. Let them know she had seen it all, and she remembered. Then she climbed into the car. The sun kept rising, and this time the city would have to rise with it. The news didn't fade. Not this time. What happened to Gloria Tate wasn't just a headline. It wasn't a 90-second segment sandwiched between weather reports and celebrity gossip. It stayed. It moved. It dug in. Within 48 hours of the footage surfacing, her quiet defiance, the handcuffs, the agent unlocking the cell door, Gloria's face was everywhere. Not the face of fear or rage, but a woman standing still in a world determined to move her. That stillness became an emblem. The nurse who didn't step back down. Across the country, something shifted. Not loudly, not all at once, but undeniably. In Baton Rouge, a young teacher played Gloria's video for her civics class. Afterward, a girl raised her hand and asked if they could write letters to their mayor, demanding an audit of police complaints. By lunch, the entire 8th grade was involved. In Chicago, a retired community organizer sat down at her kitchen table and pulled out a legal pad. She hadn't touched City Hall paperwork in nearly 10 years. But something about the image of Gloria, hands behind her back and head held high, lit a fire she thought had gone cold. In Oakland, a public defender who had grown numb to injustice stayed late after court. She opened a spreadsheet and began listing every dismissal she'd once filed reluctantly because the evidence had mysteriously disappeared. Now she had names, timestamps, a pattern. And suddenly, people who used to shrug were asking her for copies. And in Savannah, the sidewalks outside City Hall swelled with quiet protesters, not screaming, not rioting, just being. Holding signs that read, "We saw her. Stillness is power. Start with her. End with all of us." Gloria watched it unfold. Not from a podium, not behind microphones, but from her living room window. She sat in her armchair, her phone buzzing every few minutes. Reporters, activists, community groups, students. People she'd never met writing to say, "You reminded me I wasn't crazy. I wasn't weak. I wasn't alone." She responded to as many as she could. Some she just read and reread. A hand pressed to her chest like she was holding in something too wide to name. The DOJ investigation didn't stop at Coleman and Miller. It spread. Emails subpoenaed, dash cam footage recovered, memos. Once shredded, now reassembled, and with every new file, another name surfaced. Another citizen whose story mirrored hers. False arrests. Patterned intimidation. Unreported stops. The ripple became a wave. 2 more officers resigned. 1 precinct commander took early retirement. The police chief, once defiant, held a quiet press conference announcing his leave of absence for personal reflection. Walter watched the announcements beside her, arms folded across his chest, expression carved from stone. "They always retreat when the light gets too bright," he said. Gloria didn't smile. She didn't need to. Justice, she had learned, didn't feel like vindication. It felt like truth finally dragging itself out into the air, breathless, bruised, but breathing. 6 weeks later, the city held its first listening forum. Gloria didn't speak at the podium. She sat in the front row, letting others tell their stories. A teenager who had been thrown against a squad car for jaywalking. A pastor whose church had been randomly searched every month for nearly a year. A grandmother who'd watched her grandson arrested over a broken taillight and hadn't seen him smile since. Gloria nodded, made eye contact, took their hands afterward, because what had happened to her didn't make her a symbol. It made her a witness. The difference mattered. Walter stood beside her at each event. He wasn't there to lead anymore. He was there to protect. And not from violence. From erasure. The city's new oversight committee asked Gloria to join. She declined. Instead, she suggested 3 women whose stories had gone unheard for years. She knew her name opened doors now. That was enough. She didn't need a seat. She just wanted others to stop being shut out. In her neighborhood, children waved when she walked by. Not because she was famous, but because someone had told them she stood up for us. And they believed it. Even if they didn't know the details. Even if they only understood the shape of the truth. Not the names of the officers or the timeline of events. They felt it. Because the echo wasn't set volume, it was resonance. A slow, low chord that hummed beneath the noise of daily life and refused to fade. Gloria planted tomatoes that spring, and for the first time in years, she let herself imagine that something she nurtured might not get ripped up before it had a chance to bloom. Change, she knew, wasn't step swift. It wasn't stet loud. It didn't stet come wrapped in applause or closure. But it came. One voice, then another, then another. And in the space between them, the echo built a future.